Jacob Cooperman here with myself, Vic Garcia. I did that all backwards. I don't know why.
I was going to say,
but I'm just trying to give you credit because you're looking smooth. You're looking nice today. Coop, how you feeling?
I'm feeling good, dude. I got a haircut, and like we were talking about, there is never a time where a man is more confident than after he gets a haircut. Yeah. I actually walked to my apartment complex today, and I had to you know what I mean? Stiff arm women, like spin move, find the hole in the defense to get to the door. So I'm feeling ready to go. I'm feeling ready to talk about some MMA.
I'm feeling like what's his name, Ron Burgundy in Anchorman, when he's got the mirror and he's like, "Look how good I look, everyone! Look how good I look." That's how I get when I get a haircut.
We didn't plan this, by the way. We weren't like, "Hey, we got the podcast recording. We're gonna get haircuts."
No, we just needed it, and it happened organically, and I like it. I like it a lot. There are a lot of great combat stories going on right now. And number one I wanted to talk about, which is probably the biggest thing in boxing right now, is that Tyson Fury, who had a big fight with, and I'm going to throw it to you because you're better at pronouncing these crazy names than I am.
Alexander Usyk.
Usyk.
Or Usyk, either way. I think you could pronounce it either way, really.
Way better than I would have done it. I think I was going to go Usyk. I was going to mess it up really bad.
Uskarov.
Everybody's been waiting for this fight. It was supposed to happen the 17th, and we get reports and pictures of a cut that's going to take significant healing. And now that fight, which a lot of people have been waiting for, and this is coming off, of course, the great performance Francis Ngannou had against Tyson Fury, that exhibition matchup. So people are kind of curious what kind of Fury they're going to see. All of a sudden, fight's off, and there's pictures out there of a really brutal cut. Have you seen this, Coop?
I've seen a video of him getting cut. It looked weird because it looked like an uppercut grazed him when he had the headgear on. And from the video, I didn't get a good vantage point on the cut, but I'd imagine it has to be pretty. The first thing I thought, I'll get into that in a second, but I'd imagine it'd have to be a pretty substantial cut to call off a fight, especially with the background, because I went to the comments. I knew what people were going to say. I got 100 of the different, oh, you're going to be ducking Usyk. It's probably not, or Usyk. It's probably not that big of a deal. You're just running, blah, blah, blah. So I'd imagine it has to be something pretty substantial to.
It is. They released a picture. I didn't see the video. I saw the picture. So you and I are both getting it from different angles, but there's a picture out there. And it is deep. It is gruesome. I believe them when they say it's going to take multiple stitches. We're not talking like 2 or 3 stitches here. It's not a small thing. This is going to be extensive. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised if they had staples in there. But we have now we're going to have a delay. This was happening while he was training in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, and now we're going to have a delay on this fight. What do you think this fight does to Tyson Fury's career? Does he need this fight right now? Does he need it for his legacy? Does he just need it in general? I mean, how important is this fight?
Listen, I never want to pocket watch any athletes. I'd imagine if he's taking that, I think to let me say it like this, to understand Tyson's reasoning for taking the Usyk fight, we have to also understand his reasoning for taking the Ngannou fight, right? Because his reasoning for taking the Ngannou fight could be a legacy thing, it could be a money thing, or it could be a publicity thing. I know that Tyson Fury considers himself a connoisseur of all 3 of those things. He likes money, he likes people to consider him one of the best heavyweights of all time, and he surely likes the attention that comes along with these big fights. So in this fight, right, I know a lot of people were calling for him to fight Usyk because Tyson Fury, a lot of times, per my last comment, calls himself the best heavyweight of our generation. And then, of course, naturally, a lot of people were saying, well, if you're the best heavyweight, why are you not fighting the best heavyweights at current, i.e. Anthony Joshua, i.e. Alexander Usyk? A bunch of those contract negotiations had fallen through. So it could realistically be a whole bevy of things, right? Like, I know the reason that the talks fell through in the past were because it was over a revenue split. So I think Tyson wanted more. He wanted to be the A side. He wanted a 70-30, 60-40, something along those lines. And then Usyk kind of came back with that. Realistically, it could be anything. I think that Tyson Fury, unlike the Ngannou fight, stands to gain a lot if he wins this fight, obviously, because then that opens the door to future heavyweight matchups. That obviously opens up the door to a ton of money, because you know how the Saudi Arabians, for some reason, they love themselves a combat sports event. They've been I think they've been on the rise. Now, I wouldn't even say quietly on the rise. I think they've just been kind of taking over combat sports events, especially in boxing, and we're starting to see that rise in MMA. They just love paying fighters a bunch of money to like go into some palace and for His Highness put on a great event.
Well, not to get into this angle, but there just to mention it, to be a good, well-rounded journalistic commentator here. A lot of criticism on Saudi Arabia and with their involvement in all these sports is that they use it to kind of whitewash the fact that they got some backward, really old-timey sadistic stuff in the background. We're talking about the assassination of a journalist from the Washington Post, critics of the kingdom, It's the Middle East, and it's a little crazy still over there. But so the argument is that they're using sports to kind of give the front that they're this modern country, even though they have old world values and Muslim values, which nothing wrong with Muslim values and stuff like that, or any of that old world either. But, some of these countries are again, I don't want to get too into it. I'll let people decide and research that for their own. But I got to mention that because that is an important thing on why they are really into sports. They pay a lot of money for soccer players.
Golf too, Live Golf. They have that whole golf league going on.
And the WWE, they pretty much made a huge deal, which got a lot of criticism from critics of that country. And the soccer stuff I bring up is because they bought these big players, but they don't get a lot of attendance except for the teams that have those giant players on them. So anyway, just worth mentioning, right, Coop?
Yeah, well, I mean, so to your point, right, and this is not me speculating. I don't want to take this and run with this to your point. But I mean,
it is what it is. They're involved with sports now. And they're a leader in sports and combat sports in particular. Go ahead.
And that's what I was going to say is, even if let's just say that this is purely a new fascination that has opened up in the Middle East, because it is, I feel like combat sports does kind of play into the discipline, right? You talk about with more Islamic ideals, it's discipline, right? It's devoting yourself to something. I mean, some of the biggest combat athletes right now, you think about Khabib, you think about Islam Makhachev, you think about everyone that has come over from Dagestan that is of Islamic faith, right? I think it gels very well with the sport. So there's that aspect. And then to your point, I could also see something where it's like, and we've read about this, we've seen this in media, and I'm not saying that Saudi Arabia is a dystopian place, but all these dystopian places, how do you distract people from the fact that there's some shady stuff going on? You put on gladiatorial events, you put on sports events, you keep the people happy. So listen, that's all I'll say about it. It's an if, but that, I think it could realistically, maybe it's a mixture of the two. I don't know.
I think it might be a mixture of the two.
I think they just like putting on an event.
Right. No, and you got to give, they do a really good job of putting on events. If you've seen a fight in Saudi Arabia, UFC or boxing, hell, if you watch a WWE event in Saudi Arabia, it's pretty crazy. But yeah, I thought it was worth mentioning.
Let me ask you this, Vic, real quick before we move. I apologize. Do you think that a nation like Saudi Arabia putting a lot of their resources into this sport is a net positive or a net negative? Because obviously it's so much more money coming in. It's pretty much an entire nation that enjoys watching these combat sport events. I mean, what do you think?
Look, these countries have a lot of money, and a lot of it's oil money. And I'm going to say this: you have to look at it from different angles. There was a time where I could look at stuff without being influenced by other aspects of it, or I was a little more naive. But if you're looking at it from purely a sports situation and a monetary situation, it's nothing but good for the sport. But if you're very political, if you're not even just very political, but if you care about human rights, if you have strong feelings about certain political preferences, you're going to be kind of turned off by some of the stuff going over there. I was going to ask this, and again, didn't want to get too into it, but why not? That's what we do. We're talking about it. But on the UFC cards, has there been any women fighting on those cards?
See, that's the thing. I don't know. I know the March card that they were supposed to have over there either got canceled or rescheduled. I'd imagine that there would be. I know that they have certain stipulations about women. Let's just say it like that. But
that's the reason I asked that is the only thing I can reference is for the WWE. Originally, when they went up there, I think there was some hesitation. Then they started letting the women perform, and it was like a big historic deal. They made a big deal out of it. And now the women regularly do perform, but when they do, they're basically wearing full bodysuits. Like everything's covered from wrist all the way down to the ankle. And the neck up is whatever, but everything's covered. And again, I'm just saying that there's different customs, and it's a very old world country. It's very religious country, so that type of stuff. So imagine if you're a feminist or you're someone who feels strongly about women's rights, and this company, and sure, these people have every right to turn down going with whatever sports organization they're with, but imagine you're watching that and how you would feel about that. So that's just one aspect of it. So it's interesting. It really is.
I think one conversation you could have, or a question you could ask as to not the morality, but perhaps some of the logistics of getting into a deal like this is if it starts with, let's just say because the WWE is supposed to be a spectator sport. The women are, you could also make the opposite argument about here in America, where all of these WWE star women are like in thongs and like, do they want to be doing that? Or is that a stipulation around them performing? I think the broader conversation, or the question that you should be asking is, how much does money, doesn't matter if it's coming from Saudi Arabia, could be oil money, could be anything. It's if anyone throws a gigantic amount of money at the UFC, at the WWE, at boxing, how much does that dilute the product? Because if you just start listing the people who throw the largest amount of money at your organization, right? It might start with having women wear full body suits, but then like, hey, we want a rule change here. We want a rule change. So I think that's where you have the conversation where it is a little bit more of a slippery slope.
Well, I think the main part of it, though, is that, the UFC and boxing, it's like a handful of shows a year. And the primary part of it, the primary amount of shows are done in America or spread out through Brazil or South America or wherever else they feel like going in the world, which is good on them. But over here, we have the privilege of having that conversation of whether someone should be doing this and doing that, or if it's right to restrict this and that. And it is a fact that you go over there, you don't have freedom of speech. You don't have the same rights you have over here. You're giving up a lot to go over there. And right now they're making it really fun and everything, but don't forget, I mean, unless you're like a huge celebrity, and even these huge celebrities can go up there and make a mistake like you can in this country. And here you'll pay the price, sure, but you'll get a fair trial. You'll get, and again, we've grown up, Coop, in this country. We appreciate the things in this country, or we take them for granted. And sometimes you forget about, this is the rest of the world. And then there's the other argument to be made. Again, this isn't a political show. Sorry, folks. But there's the other argument to be made that they're their own country. It's their right to be wherever they are and everything. But and then there's some people that have backward ass thoughts that are super critical of this country. But then over there, you can just, look, I don't want to get into that whole thing.
Whatever way you slice it, everyone's always going to disagree or agree on something. It's always.
Yeah, I think more money. I'm sorry to cut you off. Today we're having a little bit of, and I feel that way, but I think we're having a good conversation here. I think putting more money into the sport and some exposure and everything, and making it a big spectacle is a good thing for boxing and for the UFC. But you take the good, you take the bad.
I think it's for boxing. It's almost boxing might be a little bit more at risk because I know that boxing is historically pretty corrupt. So
yeah,
I know that's my only thing is like take all the politics out of it. It's just anyone throwing a large amount of money at a sport and saying that this is the way that I want it. It needs to be done this way. If you start bending the knee to that can open up problems. And I don't want to make it sound like I'm saying that Saudi Arabia is like evil or anything, but dude, like when you have that much money and you could just say, hey, I'm going to throw $50 million to make this event. It's going to be on a cruise ship. It's going to have bottle service and everything. We're going to pull out all the stops, but here's my list of stipulations. I think it'd be up to Dana White to say, okay, no, or listen, whatever boxing promoter, PBC's promoter to say, okay, no, we're not going to do that. DAZN's promoter to say, okay, that might compromise the integrity of the sport, or that might make some of the athletes uncomfortable. Because if there's not that, then that just opens up Pandora's box.
And I don't know how we got it. Well, I know how we got into this a little bit, but Tyson Fury, I do think in general this, and just to sum up on this point I think this is an important fight for him. Not to diminish anything Ngannou says, but it also is going to be proof if not, Fury has lost some of his power and his stature as a boxer. But we also got to put in perspective, since we're talking about all the taboos here with it, is that the reason they're having this fight in Saudi Arabia is because Tyson Fury has a loose affiliation with an international criminal, which has kind of barred him from fighting in the U.S. Right now. And I'm not saying that he's done anything with this criminal or knows of any criminal thing, but he is affiliated. He has not renounced it. He has not backed away from it. And that's costing him the ability to fight in the U.S. So that's there we go on that.
I think, yeah, I mean, to me, Tyson Fury seems like the type of guy to say, if you don't want me fighting in your country, fuck you. I'm going to just go and fight in Saudi Arabia. I'm going to go fight back in Great Britain. I'm going to go fight, So it's like, yeah, but it is weird. There's just a bunch of MMA is less so like this, but boxing has always been people behind closed doors shaking hands and cutting things. So, I mean, listen, I'm not saying that Tyson Fury is a bad guy, but I wouldn't be surprised if there was probably some stuff that the public wasn't keen to all the time going on.
And he does have FU money. Speaking of FU, there's my transition there.
There you go.
Was not watching, but I was reading up about the UFC 299, one of the big fights, which involved Dustin Porier, who hasn't fought in a while. And the argument there is because people are afraid to fight him. So the UFC announces that he will be fighting at UFC 299, and he will be taking on Benoit Saint Denis, an up-and-comer. Great fight, great matchup. What do you think of that matchup?
Benoit Saint Denis is an absolute. I mean, he literally is a trained killer. Like that, especially by Joe Rogan. That phrase gets thrown around a lot in the UFC, which is like that guy's an absolute killer. Benoit Saint Denis, I feel like there's a pretty good chance he's actually killed someone in his life before because he trained special forces and took up MMA as and now he's one of the most touted prospects at lightweight, right? I mean, you saw what he did to Matt Favola. That's insane. What he did to Ismael Bonfim. I mean, this guy is a savage. Dustin Porier is a savage. I like that Porier now is kind of getting out of this, like the current and kind of topical feeling about Porier is that he's just a guy that's going to fight Justin Gaethje or Charles Oliveira or Islam or any of the top five, that it's kind of just there's a smorgasbord at the top five at lightweight right now and that they're not stepping out and fighting any contenders. You've got your contender fight. You've got Dustin Porier fighting Ismael Bonfim, and it's not even on UFC 300. So I like that step from Porier going out and listen. If you're going to pick any prospect, you pick Ismael Bonfim. That is, I gotta respect it.
Right. Well, So, but originally there was a bump in the road. So it is happening at 299. But the Diamond put out on social media that it wasn't happening. Then it immediately kind of got solved and it was happening. He said he spoke prematurely. Ariel Helwani, in between, said this was a good example of the UFC continuing to put press releases out for fights that weren't 100% put together and then having to then walk it back. And then took credit essentially for the fact that this fight was happening because he basically called out the UFC and he was saying that this fight wasn't going to happen until Porier put out the complaint. That this was all kind of a strategic maneuver, and we all know that Helwani. It's a complicated inside baseball story, but I found it very interesting because Helwani here really, really loves to enjoy to push the UFC.
Anti-Dana White, always.
Anti-Dana White. And look, I like Helwani. I don't like some of the things he does. And it's this line between, we're upfront in who we are, but it's this line where I'm a reporter, but what he really is a commentator. What he really is, and I know he does reporting on this one, but this taking credit from social media type of thing really seemed petty for Helwani. What do you think?
That's classic Helwani. That's also classic UFC, right? Like this is something I think Helwani, most times when he comes out with something against the UFC, most times there is a little bit of truth to what he's saying. Like Dana White has done this before. It's also, I mean, to sit here and act like that's not probably standard practice within the industry. Like I love how Helwani thinks that fight cards are just made contingent upon everyone shaking hands at a certain point. Like obviously fighters need to sign agreements. They need contractual obligations and all that stuff. But imagine if Dana White made fight cards exactly when he said, I'm not going to hold this. I'm going to hold this until everyone signs bout agreements. Every single person. Boom, 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 boom. Right? Like I'm not going to announce it. I'm not going to anything until every single fighter has agreed to fight each other. They've signed up. They've given me their medical. Like, could you imagine how many cards would A, fall apart? B, could you imagine the scheduling nightmare that would present? Oh. You know, like, and so for Helwani to sit here and say that that's like a sneaky, underhanded tactic, sometimes it might be, but hey, most times this is the fight game. This is the fight business. It's a business just as much as it's a sport, just as much as it's an entertainment vehicle for people to watch. You know, what likely happened was that he got in contact with what do they call him now? BSD, and they got in contact with Porier, and he said to Porier, hey, do you want to fight BSD? Porier was like, yeah. And then I know they came out with the text saying that Benoit knew about the fight beforehand because that was something someone came out countering Helwani with that. He probably reached out to Benoit and said, hey, Benoit, do you want to fight Porier? And Benoit said, yeah. And Dana just banked on the fact that they were going to get the contractual stuff done. And so he put the fight. I don't see anything wrong with that, but I do. Again, Helwani is correct. That's happened before, but as always, I feel like he's using this to push his own agenda. And that's the thing that I don't really like, is that he'll take anything to be able to get this personal vendetta across the line and to take credit for something. He did the same thing with the Ngannou fight, to take credit for something that he played a hand in, but it wasn't all him.
You know what I hate in social media is really like, and I appreciate social media, but social media has really also promoted some of the very negative parts of not only the sport, but life. There's this subculture, and especially in the fight game, where people are just trying to get scoop all the time. And if you're a reporter, there's a difference between being a reporter and being someone that's addicted to just breaking scoops and getting credit for the. You can be a good reporter and break stories, but you can also break a lot of stories and get scoops and kind of be a subpar reporter. You know what I'm saying? I think this is a bad thing that's in the culture and the fight reporting culture of people who are just trying to always take credit for something, and when it shouldn't be more about the fights and the situation. And I just think these little petty things and these little fighting, I mean, it's really real between Helwani and Dana White, though, and we know that. So he's going to take any opportunity to kind of crap on them, which is, and it's odd, too, because the sport really is. I'm not saying the UFC owns the entire bit of MMA, but let's be honest. It's about 70% of what MMA is. Most people don't say MMA. They say, oh, you're a UFC fighter, right? We know that there's Combate Global, that there's PFL, and you and I know that, but the large majority of America doesn't know that. So I'm just trying to understand the end game and these little, as I've used the word a bunch of times today when we were texting, shenanigans. It's all like shenanigans. And I find it to be silly. You know, it's funny. We're already talking about 299. I think there's 2 or 3 events still until we reach 299, which is in March. But I started thinking about UFC 300 as well. And I wanted to compare it to 200 and to 100. And I wanted to ask you if you thought that the current card for UFC 300 is going to live up to the hype. Now, just to give us some background here, UFC 200, which was in 2016, and coincidentally, I forgot about this, was the last card under the Fertitta banner. This is the last card the Fertittas threw before it became Endeavor, WME, but Endeavor essentially now. Headlined by Amanda Nunes and Miesha Tate, Brock Lesnar and Mark Hunt, Daniel Cormier and Anderson Silva, Jose Aldo and Frankie Edgar, Cain Velasquez, and Travis Brown. This is just the main event. You go back to UFC 100, and I remember watching this in my apartment in New York. Was pretty wild. Brock Lesnar versus Frank Mir. This is that rematch. George St. Pierre and Thiago Alves, Dan Henderson and Michael Bisping, the infamous KO punch, John Fitch and Paulo Thiago, and Yoshihiro Akiyama and Alan Belcher. So now we come over here, and again, I'm sorry to be long-winded on this, Coop.
Wait, sorry, one sec. Alan Belcher fought on UFC 100, the same guy that we interviewed through another show?
Yes, he did.
What?
He fought Sexy Yama, man, and he lost by a split decision.
Alan the Talent Belcher, man, what a guy. A nice guy too, very nice guy. But he's also one of the scariest human beings you'll ever see.
Oh, he was really scary in that time. And just for a point of reference, that was when you and I are both affiliated with Yo MMA Rap on the Gas Digital Network, and those are still up there. I think they're worth watching sometimes.
The Alan Belcher interview, dude. I was like, I would not want this guy to be right in front. If that guy asked you for your seat, that's not your seat anymore. Type of vibe.
He did not expect it. I don't think it was sold to him that it was a comedy podcast. We were trying to have fun with MMA. But
he was short about it. You know, if I'm remembering I think he didn't expect it, but he was a good like.
And by the way, he was even more intimidating because he's now a heavyweight. He's not with BKFC. He was for a little while, but he was their champion, I believe, right?
Yes, he cruised to the heavyweight championship. I think he was undefeated. He might still be undefeated, or he might have like something like a 7-1 record. I'll put it up on the screen, but yeah.
This was middleweight Alan Belcher.
Yeah.
Sexy Yama is not a huge dude. So this was middleweight Alan Belcher, which is pretty wild.
Still scary as ever.
So UFC 100, that was in 2009. So now let's talk about UFC 300. And this is why I want to ask you this question. Right now, they've got Zhang Weili, and I know I'm mispronouncing that. Yan Zhanan.
Pretty good, pretty close. Zhang Weili. Actually, yeah, I feel like you could talk that. You could chalk that up as a W.
All right, I appreciate that. Thank you, Coop. And then, so she's the champ. She'll be defending her title. I think that's the first Chinese on Chinese matchup there for a belt
Ever in recorded history.
I think in UFC history, MMA, I don't know, but for sure UFC.
Recorded history is like.
I don't think recorded history because you look at ONE FC, you got to imagine they've probably had that.
UFC history, I should say.
And that's because they, of course, corner the Asian market, not because I'm trying to make a smart-ass comment or a joke about that. I just want to be clear. Justin Gaethje, and this is another weird, and we could talk about this too. He's going to be defending the BMF title, which apparently is a real defended title now against Max Holloway. So, and if you don't know what BMF stands for, figure it out. Charles Oliveira versus Armin Tsarukyan. I think I said that
right. You know these names. Come on.
I'm getting better. I really am. I'm getting better.
I don't know. Vic was like, listen, if I butcher any of these names, don't get mad. And then went on to perfectly pronounce every single name on there.
What about Jiri Prochazka?
That was close. It's Jiri Prochazka.
I knew it. I went Jiri. I went Brazilian on it. And Alexander Russian. Aljamain Sterling and Calvin Kattar, Bo Nickel and Cody Brundage. Of course, they haven't kind of figured out what the main event is. You're going to imagine it's going to be the top of this. But these are some big fights. Devison Figueroa versus Cody Garbrandt.
That's
and then probably the most interesting new addition to it is Kayla Harrison versus Harrison.
Yeah.
Bobby Green's on here against Jim Miller, Jessica Andrade versus Marina Rodriguez. Does this card live up to the other two cards, the 100, 200, and 300? Because you got to imagine, since you're talking 100 cards each, these are special cards. I felt like 100 was special. 200, I didn't get the same feeling, but maybe I'm wrong. But how do you feel about 300 lining up?
For me personally, I think it's important to understand. I actually did a video on this. I feel like I say that a lot in the show, but I did a video on this to talk about people's expectations for this card. We have to understand what the bar is. Does anyone know what the bar is? Because there's been 3 of these cards so far. And a lot of people say, okay, well, the UFC's been around for a while. It's 300 events. They should have this type of stuff figured out. There has only been 3 of these big, spectacular cards. UFC 200, if I'm remembering the public, didn't really take too well to. It looked really good on paper. And then I feel like the public consensus around that fight, now I can't speak to 100. That's more of your wheelhouse. But I remember people saying about 200, it was kind of for what was, again, advertised to us, given to us on the posters and they had that really sick build-up trailer. It definitely underperformed. I think that we in general should give Dana a lot more leniency when making these gigantic cards, because a lot of people just focus on the fact that we should have fun fights. We should have fights that are just going to be off the chain insane. We need to get Alex Pereira versus, Jamal Hill, throw him in there, double knockout. These guys are going to be swinging. But what a lot of people, I feel like, don't ever take into consideration is the fact that there are still rankings. There are still fights that need to be made that make sense. Like Aljamain Sterling versus Calvin Kattar. That's a really fun fight. That's also a fight with larger implications. Same with the Davidson Figueiredo and Cody Garbrandt fight. Davidson Figueiredo's up a weight class. Cody Garbrandt just had a really nice knockout over Brian Kelleher. So I think what Dana has done, considering the circumstances, picking up Kayla Harrison, who's one of the largest figures in women's MMA at the moment, while it might be, I know both her and Holly Holm are getting up there in age, and Harrison might not be able to make that weight. I don't know how she's going to make 135. I still think we should cut Dana some slack, regardless of the product we have in front of us, for trying to make, especially if you think about the injection that Kayla Harrison brings to the 135-pound division, for making fights that are not only fun, but that make sense. And I think if this were 298, we would be saying this is the greatest card of all time. All right. So I don't know. I think we should pump the brakes on saying this card is mid, especially because we don't know the main event and we haven't had the hindsight of seeing, because a lot of times, listen, 299 could be terrible, right? It looks really good. It looks really appealing at the offset, but we don't always know how good a card is going to be just by the names that are attached to it. This one has the names, but I think since it's 300, everyone's kind of expecting, I don't know, the second coming of Jesus to be fighting Israel Adesanya or something.
The people want, we've mentioned wrestling a lot today. I'm sorry, but people want WrestleMania. You know what I mean? But WrestleMania is as much as I love pro wrestling, is a fake. There's someone that can book anything there. You have super heavyweights fighting Floyd Mayweather at WrestleMania. Doesn't make any sense, okay? But here's my take on this, because I'm looking at 100 right here. Main event was Brock Lesnar, Frank Mir, and Brock was the champ. Frank was the interim champ. The co-main event, George St. Pierre versus Thiago Alves. St. Pierre was the champion. You go to 200. Misha was the champ. In the middle, you had Cormier versus Anderson Silva. That wasn't even in the co-main event because they put Brock in there. But this is, Brock 100 events later. And Daniel Cormier was the champion. So you're looking at 300 right now. The women's strawweight's the only legitimate championship being defended on there. I'm not going to count the BMF title, although it's a little fun thing. It's not a real title. And hear me out. And I know this is unrealistic, so don't crap on me in the comments or anything. I think, what I would love for UFC 400 if they attempted to do, which I think they should have attempted at one point. But it's crazy to try to what I think of for a marquee event like this is all the champions fight on it. All of them fight on it would be something special. Maybe UFC 500. I don't know. Like to really try to get that going. But and again, I know it's unrealistic saying that. How unrealistic do you think that'll ever happen, Coop?
Well, I mean, the first thing that I thought when you said that was that the PFL is doing that with Bellator. They're doing that card. So perhaps there is something.
Oh, it's already falling apart though. Have you seen that?
No. What happened?
There's already I can't name the person or whatever because I didn't look it up this morning. I respect Bellator and I'm going to watch that event. I respect PFL, but one of the fights already got blown out. It's not happening. There's another fight where it's just the Bellator champion against somebody. It's not lining up like it was. So maybe that's a good point against what I was trying to say, in that maybe it's unrealistic to have every champ be on the card.
Well, the only thing that I'm saying is that if you want the bigger you scale a card, let's just say hypothetically they do 5-card main, 5-card prelims, right? Or 5-fight prelims, 5-fight main. So you do heavyweight championship, light heavyweight, middleweight,
women's heavyweight, women's 135.
Yeah, also there wouldn't be even enough or you could put some on the early prelims, but it would. I think you could do that. The only thing I'm saying is that it would have to be the number one contender, right? I feel like if you're going to make a card like that, it has to serve each division. You can't just have the number 16 because he's a fun guy fight the champion on a card like that.
Oh,
just
I see what you're saying. I get it.
Yeah, there needs to be. I feel like, and maybe I'm too much of a purist of the sport, and I want to keep the kind of pro wrestling worlds and MMA worlds not totally separate because there is a little bit of bleed through in between the two, and I think that's healthy. But I just don't think that. I think what the fans want. First off, they don't know the bar that they are criticizing the UFC for. A, because they've never matchmaked on a card, or what's the past tense on matchmaked? Matchmade? Matchmade a card? Booked. Yeah. They've never booked all these fights. So first off, they don't even know what goes into it. I mean, I've seen at the amateur level, fights fall through all the time because fighters don't get their medical. There's all that. And then, like I said, you cannot just make a card full of gigantic but also meaningless fights. That's not, especially with the ESPN deal and especially with Dana. You mentioned this last podcast, Vic, especially with Dana wanting this to be more like basketball, more like football. I can't think of anything more antithetical to that idea than literally just taking all of that and throwing it out the door because the fans want to see pro wrestling. That's my only thing. So I think you could make that happen, but you just got to do it smartly.
Well, I guess in the other argument, to be fair, too, is you've got all these championships and you've got a years of planning. And some of these are very marquee matchups. Why would you put them on the undercard of, I get it. But, that's kind of how I see it. Maybe I'm looking forward to 300. I think 300's lining up. I'm looking forward to 299. I'm looking forward to all the events in between here. Before we go, I wanted to bring this up because I saw this, and there's some controversy around this film because of how it's coming out. We'll get into that in a sec here, but did you watch the Roadhouse trailer for the movie that's going to debut?
Of course. Hey, fellas. Yeah.
What did you think? Because look, what's his name? Why can't I remember his name? The star of the movie,
Jake Gyllenhaal.
Jake Gyllenhaal. You know he's going to be good. That you saw when they filmed some of this stuff earlier. I think it was last year, right? Or was it the year before?
At one of the UFC events, yeah.
But I was really impressed with Conor McGregor, and I know he's a polarizing figure in the sport right now, but I thought he looked awesome as whatever character he's going to be, which looks to be the heel character, the bad guy in the movie, the enforcer level guy. I got really excited about that, and I thought he looked amazing. What did you think?
Yeah, I mean, he looked really, really good. And it's something that I've actually kind of like tossed in my head around a lot is the fact that obviously when you have real skill, that will take you far in the acting world. Like if you can convey emotions and you go to classes and you learn how to channel. McGregor is, I think, a walking example of if you're a charismatic person, you will look good on camera no matter what. Because McGregor, like I saw some jokes. They were like, McGregor just looks like he showed up to the set and was himself. And they said, all right, just keep the cameras rolling. Because that's exactly, I mean, Conor plays a good bad guy. You see, he's like over the top. He's over exaggerating everything. An acting coach would probably tell you not to do any of the things that McGregor did in that trailer, where he's like, don't let anyone get this close. Like he's, over it. But it's McGregor and he's charismatic and he's a big personality. So I think that's what makes it work. And I
think whoever that director, well, I know who the director is. I think he got the best out of him for that because I found him even more compelling than he usually is. And I was sitting there because I'm expecting him. My expectations with fighters and movies, my expectations are low. Okay. But I kind of was amped up about this movie. And the controversy apparently is the director says this is Jake Gyllenhaal, like he would be up for a nomination for the Academy Award. I don't know how skewed his view is on that, but it's going to be on Amazon Prime right away. And he wanted it to be in the theaters. I kind of wanted to see this one in the theaters. I really want to see this on the big screen. I hope they work something out where they kind of do the double thing because I want to see this in the movie theaters. I don't want to. It feels too much like a TV movie when it just goes direct to video. And I'm excited about this movie, which, by the way, I do not know how it parallels to the original Roadhouse.
Probably not
at all, because the guy, what's his name? I forget his Dalton.
Dalton, yeah.
He wasn't a UFC fighter or any type of fighter in that movie. He was just like a badass that went from bar to bar, right? And
just kick people's asses. Well, that's why I'm excited for this movie. Is like I know Jake Gyllenhaal's character is going to get to the UFC, but in the beginning, it looks like he's just some throwaway guy in a bar that likes fighting people. So I'd imagine it's going to be just. I think, and you know what? I don't mean to play devil's avocado to what you were saying there, but
devil's avocado, word of the day.
You like that? That's a term I'm coining. What was I going to say? Oh yeah. Well, so for instance, I think I've seen a lot of these movies, like what I think this movie is shaping up to be, which is like Jake Gyllenhaal. I think the last one, like this movie that he was in, was Ambulance. I don't know if you saw that movie, Vic, where Jake Gyllenhaal just plays an over the top fucking psycho that robs a bank, and then things go left, and he's just the most, like the typical Jake Gyllenhaal character, where he's like really like big eyes, and he's constantly on the verge of having a mental breakdown. He plays that character really well. That went, I think, straight to Amazon Prime as well. I could see it if it's one of those movies, because this seems like it'll just be a fun time, like a real just you sit back, you flip it on in your living room. If you're a UFC fan, if you're anyone, doesn't matter, and you just get lost. And I'm not even saying it's gonna be a bad film, because I don't know, but I'd imagine Jake Gyllenhaal doesn't sign up to something that he doesn't think is gonna be, why do that to your reputation?
I think what people don't learn, and this is why the Academy Awards kind of suck and they still haven't figured things out, is because not everything has to be Oppenheimer. Like, I appreciate Oppenheimer. I didn't go see it. I saw Killers of the Flower Moon. I went to the theater. I had to prepare like I went to a fight. I had to prepare like Conor McGregor had to prepare to be in this movie. I mean, I literally worked myself up for 2 weeks and got prepped, got hydrated, went into the theater for 3.5 hours. And it was a good movie, but man, you're killing a day with 3.5 hours. And you're talking a half an hour previews. I mean, imagine going in somewhere and just sitting there in the dark for just 4.5 hours total in the end. But some movies are made just to be fun. They don't have to be. Everything doesn't have to be Oppenheimer or Killers of the Flower Moon. And there's an art to that as well.
Oh, dude, absolutely. But you know what's funny is, Vic, you just highlighted, and we're not a movie podcast, but I will get into this real quick, is you just highlighted the age-old debate. I saw this weirdly enough. I was on movie TikTok the other day. I got to get off TikTok in general, that's for sure. It's bad when TikTok starts recommending you. I went through a breakup recently for fans of the show, and it's weird how accurate TikTok is with my exact situation. They were sending me. But anyways, I was looking on there. Mind. Yes, it can read my mind. I'm convinced it like taps into your text or something. But it is that classic age-old debate where you have the guys that are like, cinema is an art form, right? Like, it should be treated as such. The Irishman, Scorsese, what else? Killers of the Flower Moon, and then you have the people that are just like, hey, sometimes they can appreciate. I kind of fall right in the middle. You can appreciate when a movie is really well done, like Oppenheimer, but you could also appreciate when a movie is just like, it's just that. It's a good time. It's a good way to kill 2 hours. You want to see Jake Gyllenhaal go head-to-head with Conor McGregor. Conor McGregor, by the way, looks like he was just prime juice in that movie. I feel like that's part of his aggression levels. He also, I wouldn't be surprised if he skied the slopes before he went in front of the cameras there, because that looks like a coked-up McGregor. I'm not going to lie.
Oh, yeah. And I'm looking, but I like it. I think it's going to work for him. Maybe that worked for his character. I don't know. Maybe he went straight up method like Brando. I don't understand. We don't have to know that, but it looks like a fun movie. Conor looks like to be classic. I think Conor might watch. I think he should get an Academy Award at this point. I'd give him one. I don't know who's up for it this year, but
what does that do to Conor's ego, though? You think about that, God. Like, dude, yeah, he's like, I don't think we'd ever see him return to the octagon if he got one.
And people want him to come back, and I really wish he would come back, and I want to see that. And that's kind of another thing with UFC 300 too, is everybody. Yeah. I think everybody was expecting him at UFC 300 against Gaethje.
There's some whisperings too. There's definitely some whisperings, I think, of him making a return, but I don't know how, like, the shape that he's in, because I know obviously he was on the juice. We could say that. Now he's off,
but it worked and worked for. I think it was all for the movie. By the way, I don't think it was for the fight. I don't think he needs. I think it was for the movie. And now that you watch that movie, and he looks
beefy,
amazing. He looks amazing in that movie. He looks beefy. He's got no beard. He's coming up with. I didn't get the same, like, it wasn't just him playing. And don't get me wrong. Yeah, he's Conor and Conor is Conor, but I think this is like movie version Conor, and I liked it. And I was actually excited. I haven't been up for a trailer like that. I wasn't looking at that to be in a good mood. I was like, oh, here we go. And I hope the people that go into this and be like, Gyllenhaal's set up for the armbar and that UFC scene was just terrible. And that's not how the way that's put a triangle. That's how some of these people are going to go into it. Just have fun, guys. Ladies and gentlemen, let's have fun.
Listen, I don't want to extend this too much, but I don't know if you saw the fight. So they had the weigh-ins with Jake after the actual weigh-ins, and then there was a scene. I don't know if they did it on the early prelims or between the early prelims and the regular prelims or something. They had Jake come out. I did see, because people were taping from the crowd, it did look goofy. It looked really fucking goofy, because he was against the cage. He was, he was like swinging out of his shoes. So I'm like, I hope that, because you could do a lot in post. I hope that it just looks more realistic. And I hope, if I know Jake Gyllenhaal, and he's a guy that's been in Southpaw, that was a really, I don't know if it was like the fighting scenes were realistic, but that was, I think he'll do his due diligence and make it look realistic.
People get so mad about that. And I'm going to throw this out there, and I don't want to spend any time on this because I'm still bummed about it. Rest in peace, Carl Weathers, a.k.a. Apollo Creed, and all these other pop culture iconic characters. But everyone shit on the Rocky movies for that type of stuff. And that Rocky movie looks amazing. Like, you sit there. But if you turn into a total nerd, and I know that's some of our base, so I apologize, but try not to be a total nerd all the time. I have to work on it. I admit. But
well, dude,
you watch it. You can dissect the Rocky movies. You could dissect Raging Bull. Have you ever seen Raging Bull
with Al Pacino?
Oh yeah,
no,
black and white. Watch that movie and talk about the boxing scenes.
I heard it's pretty. It gets pretty intense during the end points.
I know, but you could sit there and be like, none of that looks factual.
Yeah, but dude, like, I think I'm a guy that comes at it from both perspectives. Like, I'm a big fan. Like, you know this, Vic. I like the breakdowns and I like to kind of tactically, this fighter can throw this jab to get this fighter up. Sometimes, dude, like, for instance, the latest Creed movie talking about Rocky films did a really good job at kind of leaning into less realistic boxing. And by the end, I don't know if you saw that film. I won't spoil anything for anyone that hasn't. You should go watch it. But they kind of lean into more kind of anime style fights where, they were in a ring and then they were in prison. And then it was a whole thing. I'm
going to have to watch that. That's the only Creed movie I haven't watched so far. I've watched all the other ones. I'm a huge fan of those movies. I'm a huge fan of fighting movies. But I also don't get hung up on the technicalities of it. No, because there's things that are done cinematically. It's you know what? Again, we talk about wrestling too much on wrestling. I know because we're trying not to be we're not a wrestling podcast. But,
we're a combat sports podcast. That falls under combat sports.
But I mean, I could sit there and say the Rock's punches are technically not doing any damage. And if I ever say that to you or say that in a public place, I would hope that whoever else is sitting with us, you tap them on the shoulder and you all walk up and leave me there by myself because that would be ridiculous.
That's wild.
But I digress. Hey, can I plug one thing, by the way, in regards to the wrestling podcast?
No.
I do a wrestling podcast with that's what I meant to say. I do a wrestling podcast with my buddy Chris Tinkle, who's a comedian, very funny guy. Tinkle and Vic, we're kind of in beta on YouTube. We do it every once in a while, but worth a listen just to do plugs. And by the way, people should also tune into all of your side projects that are amazing.
Yeah, Gloves Up, Jake and Josh. I mean, I talk regular pop culture stuff on that channel. I'm going to be getting back, and I'm going to do some open mics soon, even though I'm not funny enough. We'll sink and swim on that one. And then what? What else do I got going on? Yeah, I mean, just a bunch of stuff. Go check out at Instagram or on Instagram, excuse me, at Coop TV. C3O's PTV. Also, dude, I don't know if Chris wants to come on our program, but I feel like with the way that the show has been going, I feel like we're getting better each episode. We should probably talk about maybe getting a guest on. We can talk about that after we stop rolling, though. Well,
and by the way, Chris Tinkle, great guy, big MMA guy, used to co-host Hammer Fisting with me and Louis J. Gomez. Chris Tinkle also lived with John Fitch for a while. His big friends. He's been on TV with John Fitch at the Bellator fights. He's a big MMA guy, friends with Misha Tate and everybody. So it's not like he's somebody that doesn't know about combat sports because he does.
Let's get him on and go check out. You said Vic and Tinkle?
Tinkle and Vic.
Tinkle and Vic. Vic and Tinkle. Yeah, dude. Either way, you cut that. It's a nice. That's like a one of those. I know like sports radio always does that where they'll do like Coop and Vic or Cooperman and Vic in the morning.
Yeah. No, that's one of my side ideas. I got to talk to you about that one idea. Sometimes you'll get a kick out of it. But hey, man, I enjoyed talking to you today.
Dude, Vic, pleasure as always. We'll keep doing these weekly, and this one will come out a lot. This will be coming out this Monday, this upcoming month. Well, so when you guys see this, it will be Monday the 5th, I believe. Yep. Right. So we're going to try to keep that weekly consistent schedule. So each Monday, a new episode will get. The last one, I just wanted to kind of edit a ton. But yeah, expect these new ones every Monday, and then we'll maybe do a live show or two down the line. We'll have to see how that goes.
All right.